Wagon Wheel podcast this week with special guest Neil Manthorpe. That's all I had really for the intro. Manners, we have a bunch of questions that have already been pre-sent to us, of which I would expect you to be the expert on pretty much every single one of them.
I'll do my best.
All right. First one is from Christopher, who says, has anything in the last 4 England tests changed your long-term beliefs of Test cricket and how it should be played?
Yes, it has. I don't know how sustainable it will be, and I don't know how England will react, for example, if there's a place in the World Test Championship final or in an Ashes series. I think to a certain degree the new dispensation had a free hit at their new way of playing Test cricket, because England are bottom of the World Test Championship. The series against New Zealand, to some degree, was as pressure-free as you would hope to get in a Test series. So I think there are some big tests to come, and but yes, fundamentally, my understanding of Test cricket over the last 35 years has been fundamentally challenged, and I am now looking at it in a very different way.
Yeah, I think all of us have to have caveats. It's interesting seeing Steve Smith basically come out and say what everyone has been saying to us privately. All the former pros have been saying the same thing. Oh, wait till they get on a green top. Wait till they get to Chennai. Wait till they get to Guyana. Although, probably no one wants to go to Ghana and play a test match ever again. But, all those sorts of normal things that test players say. Well, can you do it on a rainy night in Bramford Lane or whatever that football saying is that I've completely muddled up there. But that kind of thing, I think that's still understandable. But I think in certain situations, and I did a podcast about this about a year ago, where it was the first time that white ball, the ODI batting average had gone above test batting averages. And the question had to be asked at that point is: Are we batting better in white ball cricket than we are in red ball, even understanding the balls? And I think that's a fair question based on what we've seen over the last 4 tests, right?
Yeah, for sure. The pitches have been pretty flat, haven't they? For the last 4 test matches. Edgbaston was really weird. It seemed to get better and better. The bounce became more and more even and more predictable, and that certainly allowed for the batting approach that Bairstow in particular employed. I think it's pretty exciting watching middle order batters hitting the ball in the air over cover and being unafraid to go over the top. That's great. And look, McCullum did say that the new approach would see the team fall flat on its face every now and then, and he said that that's fine. I presume that means being bowled out for 80 kind of thing, which could have happened, of course. They were 55 for 6. And he said as long as England win more games than they lose, then that all or nothing, high risk, high reward approach would be justified. But I remember for a while in the early 1990s, and sorry to change the subject to football, I don't follow football particularly closely, but I do tend to use quite a lot of football analogies. But do you remember, you might not know actually, Jarrod, Kevin Keegan became manager of Newcastle, and he adopted the approach that as long as they scored more goals than the opposition, it didn't matter how many they conceded. And famously, they did sort of win games 5-4 with a very leaky defence, but as long as they were scoring more goals, he was happy. And that proved unsustainable. And look, I have no idea. I'm like I said, all my perceptions of Test cricket have been challenged in recent times. I don't know whether it's sustainable. I don't know whether they'll be able to do it against 3 Indian spinners in Chennai. I strongly doubt it. I very strongly doubt it. And will they be able to do it against South Africa in 6 weeks' time? We'll wait and see. All I can say for certainty is that I'm very excited about seeing whether they can.
Which is kind of one of the most important things about all of this, isn't it? They have certainly, got everyone talking about the cricket a lot more than, just saying, isn't England rubbish again, which is what we were doing for a while. Johnny asks, is England's style of Test cricket actually easier for some smaller nations to play, as you can more easily develop the same players for both white and red ball? and then don't require such a big pool of players? I think that's an interesting question, Johnny, but I think the easiest way to do what England's doing is to actually have an absolute buttload of players who already smash the white ball. So I was talking to someone, a cricket writer who knows a lot about the game, and he was saying, well, why doesn't everyone do this? And I was like, well, England's the only team who scores at more than a run of ball in ODI cricket. No one else has even got to that level yet, right? So it's actually, for England, it makes a lot more sense in the same way that, when the West Indies went all in on fast bowlers, New Zealand probably weren't going to be able to do the same thing back in 1976.
Jarrod, for me, we can talk about pitches and balls and whether the white kookaburra does a lot less than the red dukes, which is normally the case. It didn't seem to have happened in recent times. But I think it's really interesting, isn't it, that when details started to emerge of the change of atmosphere, it seems to me that what Brendan McCullum has done, and talk about the atmosphere of Test cricket, what he appears to have tried to do and has succeeded in doing in a very short space of time, is demystifying Test cricket. Players used to feel like they were being led to the high altar of the game in sort of suitably respectful silence, dressed in their blazers and ties, and that it was, and Test cricket, the whole atmosphere, the ultimate form of the game, the whole atmosphere created was almost too reverential, and so he's by all accounts been playing Bruce Springsteen and power ballads in the dressing room throughout the Test match, and there was another thing as well, that players now no longer are compelled to travel to the Test match on the team bus. They don't all travel together. The only requirement now is that you're there half an hour before the start of play, which all sounds very radical. And I have to say that many of the players that I've spoken to quite enjoyed the reverence with which Test cricket was treated. They sort of felt like they were in the cathedral of the game, and they quite enjoyed the special atmosphere of Test cricket. So maybe it's all about the popularisation of the game. And like I said, I think it all comes down to the fear of failure. I mean, the expectations of England fans were at an all-time low, weren't they, before the New Zealand series? They'd won 1 out of 17 Test matches. They probably knew, subconsciously if not consciously, that they would be granted a honeymoon period anyway. If they'd failed, they could have said they're still bedding in. And as I said, the expectations were low. But like in the next ICC cycle, in the Future Tours programme, if they get off to a winning start, and it looks like they're seriously challenging for a place in the World Test Championship, and the next Ashes, let's just see whether they're able to adopt this freewheeling, carefree approach and not be subdued by the fear of failure that South Africa will be, for example. And in 6 weeks' time, South Africa are in second place. It means everything to not just the players, but the future of South African cricket and the status of South African cricket. So they'll be tense, they'll be edgy, and that could really work in England's favour. So I mean, it's going to be really interesting. I foresee a good deal of edginess, and I think there'll be some rancour in this series against South Africa.
Edgy and rancour. Nort says, Bazball has arrived with your futurist hat on. What comes next? I think the most obvious thing, and I think, me and Manners have already commentated some of this for SEN and SENZ, is it seems like there's a real lack of one-day skills that have been used so far by the bowling team. Whereas if you've got teams who are willing to bat like they're in one-days or T20s, surely that would be the more sensible way to be bowling at them. Whereas at the moment, I don't think we've quite seen that. And I know that there was a senior person was asked about this outside the Indian team, but they were asked about this, former player. And they were like, no, normal red ball bowling is what you should do. I'm not sure you're going to be able to get away with that if it's a flat pitch and Johnny Bairstow's flicking your best ball over backward square leg for 6. So I do think that if you're looking, Norts, at the extreme future, I think Test bowlers are going to have to do more sort of use more T20 and one-day skills. If you're looking beyond that, I don't even know where this could go, because I suppose it would be like asking someone in 1976 what whether the West Indies theory is even going to work. I mean, you'd have to go back and have a look at those articles. But my memory was people said you can't play without a spinner, and it turned out you could.
That's a really interesting and typically Jarrod Kimber on the button point. So exactly, I mean, if the batters are going to be playing more like one-day cricket, then I guess the bowlers will have to follow suit. Bowlers always do, don't they? It's always the batters who are taking the initiative and changing things, and the bowlers who have to come up with a solution to counter that. And that's really interesting. But again, there are many unknown factors. One is we've had a really bad batch of Duke's balls this summer, haven't we? They haven't really. Well, they haven't maintained their shape, literally. Doesn't seem to have been very much seam movement. There's been precious little swing for most of the time. And perhaps Bazball has just coincided with a bad batch of balls and some really flat pitches in England, which haven't deteriorated, something to do with the drainage. And I strongly suspect, but again, I wouldn't have the courage of my convictions to say this is definite, but I strongly suspect that Bazball will be less successful, spectacularly less successful in some occasions, in other parts of the world. Is that your sense as well?
I'd probably say less other parts in the world and just other places where there's any help in the pitch at the moment. I had a look at the averages. So generally in the UK, in the first 30 overs, the batting average is 28. And then from overs 30 to 80, it's 30. So it's no different. Those balls swing the whole way and the bowlers are on top. In this summer, the average in the first 30 overs is 30, and the average in the next 50 overs is 58.
That's bonkers.
So it's almost gone from parity to twice as hard to get a wicket as it used to be. And that's not all England batting either. That's a lot of Mitchell and Blundell. That's a little bit of Rishabh Pant and Ravi Jadeja, and it's Jamie Overton, isn't it? It's that Stuart Broad innings. So we've certainly seen a lot of the time where that has happened. That is a particular moment that I've never seen happen before, because I think the balls are actually hard. I think the old Duke's balls, as they currently stand, are harder to get a wicket with than a Kookaburra is. Right, because they don't really help spinners either. They just sort of become, I don't know what, like gelatinous things in your hand. Like those squeezy balls where it's popped a little bit and it's not even staying firm enough that you could squeeze it and get it to come back. A bit like that. Just remember, everyone, if you want to ask any questions in the group, Manners is only here for a little bit longer. So if you have a specific Neil Manthorpe question, who doesn't? Who doesn't have a specific question? Then also, Manners will be able to see how the app works, so he can do these on his own in the future. Although, he'll probably still call me up and ask for my help. But if you do have a request, send one through. I'll get through another Patreon question. This is a good one for you, Manners, because I'm not sure I know the answer to this. James asks, there seems to be many more former top-level players who are match referees rather than umpires. What skills does the match referee require, and are they less specialised than umpires?
I'm sure you know the answer to this. You need to be a good golfer to be a match referee. Umpiring is hard work, and there have been a few who've been fast-tracked through the system, former players like Paul Rifle. But otherwise, you need to do years and years and years on the county circuit or the state circuit or the provincial circuit, and it's hard graft. I mean, to come through the ICC program and to actually make it to the elite panel. Remember, there's only 12, and it's lonely, and it's miserable, and there's only 2 of you on the first class circuit, maybe 3. And you may not get on with them, so you're having room service, for months on end by yourself. It's really hard, and And I'm not suggesting that match referees. I know I was being a bit facetious about golf, but my goodness, they do all seem to travel with a golf bag around the world, and they do have duties to do, many of which are mundane and unexciting. You know, like logging over rates and how many minutes for in treatment for an injury to a batter. So that's all sort of pretty unexciting. But put it this way: if you're a former player and you want to stay involved in the game, I think you can probably learn all you need to learn to be a match referee and to be fast tracked into that position in about 3 weeks in Dubai. Now, you obviously have to get a little bit of first class experience as well. Most first class games these days in the Premier test playing nations have match referees. We tend to think of match referees issuing sanctions and making rulings on incidents of misconduct. But they're few and far between. There are less and less of those now. So pretty much the match referee has, I would say, an easier ride than umpires.
Yeah, I think the best way of putting it is just that it's an easier job, and essentially they just give them to former players with a little bit of training. Whereas becoming an umpire, even if you're someone like Paul Rifle who's pushed through the system, still actually takes a long time, doesn't it? So it's if you're looking for a good life, the match referee is much better. Although both of them, there's a lot of travel involved. You really have to be the sort of person who likes living in a suitcase, I think, if you're going to do those jobs. Ian says, this is a good one for Manus. Ian says, if you were South African skipper and you won the toss in the first test versus England, how much would the conditions influence your decision? And how much would putting England in to have them avoid batting in the fourth innings be a temptation?
There were some great lines coming out of Edgbaston, weren't they, when Ben Stokes won the toss, and a few of his teammates said, that's it, Ben's won the toss, we'll have a chase, thanks. Which is great. I think that would come into South Africa's thinking. I would think, particularly as well, with South Africa's bowling attack, pace attack. They wouldn't mind. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I'm just thinking out loud, really. Yes, I think that would be a consideration, wouldn't it? And Dean Algar is a wily old former county player, of course. He's got significant county experience. He'll been following this summer very, very closely. So if he believes that England not chasing in the fourth innings would be in his interest, I think. But he's an opening batsman. He likes to have a bat first. Actually, thank you for saying it's a good question for me. Now you answer it.
I think I was a bit surprised that India looked a little, not shell-shocked, because they certainly come up with plans to Bairstow, but that I don't think they thought about it as much as I would have coming in with 3 tests having it just happened. With New Zealand, I was quite harsh on New Zealand in Trent Bridge when they didn't really pivot, but at the same time, this had never really happened before, so it was a bit tough. Then it kind of happened to them again, and I was like, well, at a certain point, you've got to try more. I thought India didn't try that much. I don't know if I would be willing to tell a test captain that they shouldn't bat first because of scary England. But what I would say is, we know what they want to do. Do we want to take that away from them? Because in the first innings of these games, England are not batting anywhere like this. They're averaging far less runs per wicket. They're scoring far slower. Just see if that, mucks up their rhythm a little bit as much as anything. But yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think as an analyst, Manners, whether I'd go in and go, guys, let's change our entire plans based on the fact that England have been smashing everyone. I might say, if the pitchers keep doing what they're doing, then the best time to bat is on day 4 and day 5. So should we not do that and almost take England out of the conversation? Even though we know it's only England who's been batting on day 4 and day 5. Aditya says, if you were constructing an all-time Test 11, would Adam Gilchrist find a place in it as a keeper, or would you prefer choosing someone with better keeping skills, considering that your top 6 would be more than capable? Well, I'd have so many all-rounders probably in my team that I'm not sure I specifically need Gilchrist's batting. That said, who's the wicketkeeper that you then go for? Is it like someone like, I don't know, Prasanna Jayawardene or Bob Taylor? Like, is it, how specialist do we go with that? The best wicketkeeper of all time in that, or do you go Kumar Sangakkara or someone else?
Well, that presupposes that Adam Gilchrist wasn't a very good wicketkeeper, and I think that's unfair. I mean, the fact that he finished with a Test batting average of 47 is something of a distraction. But he wasn't moved into the Test team, as I recall, in place of Ian Healy because he was a brilliant batsman. I mean, he was a pretty good keeper, wasn't he? And I'm talking, more than just tidy. I mean, he wasn't a stopper. You're gonna disagree with me now, aren't you?
No, you're right. But I think if you did purely on wicket keeping skills, I think there were probably 4 or 5 Sheffield Shield keepers who had better wicket keeping skills than him at that time. That they could
4 or 5.
Well, Darren Berry was around. Wade Seckham was around. Tim Nielsen maybe was a better wicketkeeper. Phil Emery. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't as if there was. It was probably at that point just where that was almost the last period where you had a lot of specialist wicketkeepers around outside of Asia, and Australia had quite a few of them. So, I watched a lot of Gilchrist and I watched a lot of Darren Berry. It's a little bit like it's a little bit like comparing Tim Hedman to Roger Federer. They both technically did the same thing, but one was on another level. But you're right, he's not a stopper. The thing about Gilchrist wicketkeeping is it's not given as much credit. The wicketkeepers who came after him were far worse than he was.
Mind you just mentioned Kumar Sangakkara. If you, really, I mean, if you were picking what was the question? All-time Test 11?
Yeah.
Well, he was he's one of the greatest batters of all time, and he was pretty damn good behind the stumps as well. So,
I think he was a better keeper than Gilchrist, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. Certainly, until he gave up keeping. But yeah, I mean, especially if he was prepared to bat at 5, maybe. Then absolutely, then you can fit in all those all-rounders that you want to have in your team. But to answer the question is, I would probably go for Kumar Sangakkara, but if somebody presented me with an all-time Test 11 with Gilchrist in it, I would be far from horrified.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty fair. Remember that you can make any request to chat to us while we go through all this. Sudeep has a question where he's basically saying, it's a very long question, Sudeep, so I'll try and bring it down. But he's saying that Australia very much attacked during their era, so from 1999 through to 2007 probably, with the bat. And so Bazball isn't particularly a new concept. That's true, but I think if you go back and have a look at the runs per overs, we're talking about Australia going up from 2.5 and 3 and over to 3.5 and 4. In fact, I don't think there's a year where Australia scored it over 4 runs and over in Test match cricket in that period, unless I'm misremembering it. And then you're comparing it to the fact that there have been something like 20 or 25 innings all time with a runs per over 4.8, and England have done about 5 of them in the last month. I mean, the jump up is massive, and then you're talking about can it basically? So what's the difference? Well, the real difference is that what Australia were doing, and manager, correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but what Australia did in that period was they used fitness, a little bit of boundary hitting, and then 1 day running between the wickets to basically put on an extra half a run to an extra run and over. All right, so they took 1 day skills, whereas what McCullum's really doing, what Bazball does, is taking T20 skills and hitting skills and putting those involved.
Do you know, I've got this theory, and I don't have your skill or resources in order to be able to back it up with statistics, but I've got this theory that, and it ties in with exactly what you're saying. I've got this theory that what was behind Australia scoring at 4 and over, which they did on occasion, but, when at the beginning of the era of that great Australian team, a scoring rate of 3 and over was really eyebrow raising, and people go, "What, gee whiz?" I mean, they scored 270 runs in the day, and it was really headline news. And I got this theory that what they did was leave less balls, and I know that you'd be able to, or CricViz would be able to tell us whether that's true or not. But so my recollection is that. As you said, they took a lot more singles. They played at a lot more balls, whereas before that, a top order batter's primary concern was to leave as many as possible. That's my recollection. They would just leave it and leave it and leave it, until they finally got one on the pads and they could. It was a scoring opportunity, whereas Australia left less balls and took and ran more because they were fitter and stronger, as you said. Now it's different level. So it's apart from on the fourth afternoon when Joe Root and Johnny Bairstow were going so well, they were hitting less boundaries then. But again, they were running all the time. They were playing at deliveries, and they were taking singles, and they were running the ball down to third man. The ultimate ODI keep the scoreboard ticking over approach. Can you quickly do some research and tell me the percentage of balls that were left in the 80s as opposed to to the 2000s?
Sadly not, but I think that's fair. I think that's very fair. I think in one-day cricket, if you have that sort of mindset to be a bit more active, you're probably going to leave less balls, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, that's the point. The point is, what's your primary goal when you go out to bat? Is it not to get out, or is it to score runs? And that was the mindset that changed.
Also, the really interesting thing from an Australian point of view, if you look at the players who had a higher strike rate afterwards, they were the first generation who took one-day cricket seriously. So I remember interviewing Ricky Ponting once, and I was like, "Why did you take one-day cricket seriously?" And he was like, "Well, I grew up and it was on the TV. We didn't know that players didn't take it seriously until, we got picked for Tasmania or Australia. And suddenly, and that's, that whole story about that Australian A side, being as good as the Australian side. That's because the Australian A side were actually thinking about one-day cricket and playing one-day cricket really well. And the other side was just sort of rocking up and playing games. And I think that sort of, that probably happened first with Australia, but I think that happened really everywhere. And so that slow rise of the run rate that we had until, was it 2009, 2010, probably just comes from all those skills that all those people had learnt. And if that's the case, well, then we're about to go through a similar generation with all the kids who grew up watching T20 and thinking that's a serious competition, right? So it does make a lot more sense. This is a rip a few minutes. Wait, let me just check if anyone in the group has put their hand up yet. No, you're safe. Lucky. James says, when compiling an all-time 11 for a country, do you think players should be eligible who played for other countries prior to their homeland becoming an independent nation? So he's talking about Ranji. He's talking about Rhodesian-born Colin Bland. Should be available for an all-time Zimbabwean 11. I've never thought about this before. I think generally you would look at what they did for the country they were supposed to play for. Or sorry, the country that they did play for, if you're judging if they're an all-time player. But, if you're doing the all-time best Scottish 11, you're probably going to have Ian Peebles in it, aren't you? That's a random reference, sorry.
Well, there are precious few players that have played for two test-playing nations, and I don't think that Kepler Wessels would be vying for a place in the all-time Australian 11, but he might. He might be a contender. He'd feature in the discussions anyway for a South African. Certainly, modern era all-time 11. It's very interesting. I'm not sure about what I think about that. How about Michael Rippon? I wanted to ask you this because you'd know this. Has anybody else played for three nations at international level?
That's a very good question. We've got a lot of dual, don't we? I can't think of anyone else. There might be like someone random who played for India and then Pakistan and then went on to like immigrate to somewhere in Europe or something and play an international,
Played for Romania.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? I mean, I suppose that's possible, but it wouldn't be an internet. It wouldn't have been an ODI or a Test match or anything.
No.
So Michael Rippon,
he didn't actually play for South Africa.
No, he didn't, did he?
No.
He still could.
Well, I suppose so. But I mean, he was born and grew up playing, learnt the game in South Africa, and then courtesy of a Dutch grandfather played for the Netherlands, and now of course he's about to play for New Zealand. So I kind of think of him as being a 3-country cricketer, even though he hasn't actually played for South Africa. He's
played professional cricket in 4 countries outside of the sort of T20 franchise system, that's got to be close to a record. Maybe Graham Hick managed to do that. I don't know. I can't think of too many players who've ever played professional, first class cricket or, top level cricket in 4 different countries the way that Michael Rippon has. It's a ridiculous system. Also, he's really good. I reckon I sent a tweet about 9 years ago going, why are these counties not signing this guy up? He's a left arm wrist spinner who could spin it both ways. It feels like it's the slowest. He must be about 30 now. I reckon I first saw him when he looked like he was a fetus. It's been such a slow rise for someone who was so obviously talented. There's only about 9 left-arm wrist spinners in the world, man. You'd think they'd be able to fast-track one of them.
I think he's into his 30s. I think he's 31 or maybe even 32 now.
He's almost dead. Will says, this is a question for me. Will says, you're not doing polite inquiries anymore. Will you ever be on Ask George? Well, George came on one of my videos. Sadly, I asked my producer Muku to edit George out, but he didn't do it. I'll be on Ask George if George ever asks me to be on Ask George. And then Will also says, can you explain Stuart Broad's batting? I've got a big video coming out about Stuart Broad very soon. The interesting thing for me is that there was a time where England thought he was good enough to bat at number 7 in a Test match, and he did it. He did it for 3 straight Test matches, and the 3rd Test match he was in before lunch. Because Stuart Clark absolutely tore through, I think it was at Headingley, absolutely tore through England, and then they never did it again. And almost outside of that one innings against Pakistan, which probably has to have a fairly large asterisk next to it these days, he was on a slump well before Varun Aaron hit him in the face. But it does feel like he's worked out a very good method of getting between 15 and 35 runs in the most entertaining way possible. And he's like a high-functioning number 11. Is that fair, Manners?
I don't know. I'm fascinated by your view on the batting abilities of guys like Broad and Tim Southee's the other one.
I knew you'd bring up Southee, your guy.
Whenever anybody mentions the potential all-round abilities of those two, you're especially disparaging. So I'd like to know, is there anybody who is widely condemned as a batter who you think is actually better than they are? I mean, people say, Tim Southee's the same though, isn't he? I mean, how many times does he make a quick 30 at number 9 these days? Better than a runner ball, and they're often quite useful runs. So why are you so disparaging about them? And who do you think's underrated as a batter?
I'm not disparaging about them.
You are.
I'm very upset with people referring to them as all-rounders when they are not all-rounders. An all-rounder is a specific... There's a reason we have that phrase in cricket, and there's a big difference between someone who can occasionally get you a 30 and Ravi Jadeja, right? And if we're putting those in the same basket, what are we even talking about? No, I think Tim Southee and Stuart Broad have potential to be... And you could put Shardul Thakur in this as well, who was also called an all-rounder, and I was also very disparaging about that. And Mitchell Starc, although, weirdly enough, Mitchell Starc might be the one who's becoming an all-rounder. But you can throw Mitchell Johnson back in from the old days as well. I think a lot of those guys have the ability to almost bat like a number 11, but at number 8 or number 9, and be disruptors, right? And it's almost baseball like a way of thinking about it. Remember, like there was a lot of times where teams would put the more center, you'd put your Pat Cummins or your Paul Harris, right, up at 8 or 9, and I was like, shouldn't you be putting the guy up who's going to just slice a bunch of balls over and completely upset the other one while you've got a batter at the other end? And it seems to have gone out of fashion to have that sort of attacking number 8 or 9. who just could slog a quick 30, which can put you off a little bit. We saw what Bumrah did, against England in that last test. He only middled like 1.5 balls in that over, but still managed to, just because of the way he attacked. So I do think there is value in that. What I don't think there is value in is pretending that these players are all-rounders. Because the long list of people I've been told who can be all-rounders at test level include people like Morné Morkel. And it's just not true. Do you remember that? Remember the whole, Morné Morkel, he's got a good back foot drive. He's going to be an all-rounder. Him and Stuart Broad were thought to be all-rounders at a similar era. And it's like, what are we even talking about here? We're literally, he's got one shot. Mitchell Johnson made 100 against South Africa when Australia had already lost the game, and everyone lost their minds thinking he was going to be the next great all-rounder. No, some people can hit, and that's a great skill to have. And as I said, there's a real... I think those sorts of players have kind of been undervalued, maybe since the 70s, where we keep pushing up the guys who are really sensible. The Matthew Hoggard type guys, we push them up the order, and the Jason Gillespies, and it's like, well, actually... the Craig McDermott and Pat Simcoxes are probably, far more troubling when you're bowling to that kind of team. That's all I'm saying, Manners.
Do you remember when Morné Morkel opened the batting in a test match?
I don't remember when it was, but it must have been early in his career, wasn't it?
It was the Graham Smith broken hand test match at the SCG in the second innings.
Yes.
And so the discussion was, do we all move up one place in the order? And I think Hashim Amla was batting 3 at that stage, and Jacques Kallis was 4, and they all said no. At which point Morné Morkel said, I'll do it. And it was a massive shock to all of us. We're sitting in the commentary box, and I remember Jim Maxwell or somebody nudging me and saying, who's that walking out with Neil Mackenzie? And I said, I don't know. And I looked and I kept thinking, one side of my brain was saying, it's Morné Morkel. And the other side was saying, it can't be. It cannot be Morné Morkel. And anyway, he was caught mid-off second ball.
I'm going to pose this to you. You can come up with an answer by the end of the podcast if you like. Danny Morrison also opened in a test match. Modern cricket, which one? I would say Morrison was a worse bat than Morné Morkel, but you can think about that if you don't want to stick your thing to it. But my memory,
I'd have to go with that. I mean, Morné Morkel made 50s. Did Danny Morrison make 50s? I mean,
I don't know, but what my memory of Danny Morrison was how quickly he broke the world record for the most ducks. Like, it seemed to be an extraordinarily fast rise to be that bad that quickly, and he ended up with a fairly decent number 11 record, which, decent number 11 record doesn't mean anything, but do you know what I mean? He wasn't Chris Martin or Glenn McGrath, and yet he got a lot of ducks. We got Ekanth coming through, so hopefully you'll be able to hear him, Manners. Ekanth, what's your question? I can hear you. That's... Oh, I mean, I've got so many thoughts on this, but I'll let the expert answer you first. Manners?
I've also got so many thoughts on this. We're going to have to do a whole different program, a whole different show just on this subject. But so, a couple of years ago, how Jarrod, you'll be able to give me a sort of time frame on this, but my sense is that maybe 15 years ago there was a move by cricket boards around the country to bleach all the personality and character out of their players, and they actually sort of went on training courses with the PR and communications departments on their various boards when they were actually taught how to say nothing. and to not answer questions. And there was this fear that they might say the wrong thing, and it would be a public relations disaster. And the public relations disaster duly happened because the players were so featureless that even respectable journalists like me and Jarrod had to go off, looking for stories and not that we ever tabloided ourselves, but the players would just say the same thing over and over and over again. And I'd just like to say, and I've done various training courses, as you have, Jarrod, with players and with agents, and I would just like to say that players who say something and have an interesting tale to tell and tell the truth and are impervious to the bleach that is that they are required to the bleach bath that they're required to take when they become an international player, their careers, I believe, generally speaking, go further and last longer because subconsciously or consciously we as the media enjoy a personality and we enjoy somebody with character, and somebody who is dull and featureless and gives and says nothing. And after all, they're not talking to us; they're talking to cricket lovers because we're just the medium that passes on the message. And in my experience, there tends to be less sympathetic writing and commentating on players who might be going through a difficult period if they've done nothing to promote themselves or the game. So that's just one thought.
Yeah, I think that era that you're talking about, it was very much the media managers would give them 2 or 3 key phrases. And I remember Brad Haddon, whether you like him or not, had a very strong personality. And I remember there was, I can't remember if it was an Ashes test. It might have been 10, 11 Ashes. We did a press conference with him. And he used the phrase, "This game does turn," something like 17 times. And the only reason that it was entertaining is because he got more and more agitated every time he had to use it. And he just kept saying it over. And of course, the game didn't turn. Australia got absolutely belted the next day. But I do remember that. And then talking to some of the media managers, I would say that in that era, and you were a media manager, that is, of occasions for Zimbabwe. But I'd say that era, the whole media manager was to almost hide the players away as much as possible. So it wasn't just that the boards were training them. Media managers were going out of their way to make sure that nothing was ever said. I think we've had a great crop of media managers in international cricket over the last few years. Also think, T20 franchises made it a lot easier for the press to get to people. What I would say, and ECB asked me for my opinion. They took me out to lunch and I told them what I thought, and they still haven't done it, which is they should do mix zones all the time. And they should allow the players to tell their own stories in their own words. And they should make it so that at the end of each day there are 5 or 6 really interesting stories coming out of a day's cricket, or the day before a game, or the day after a game, and not just one story written over and over and over again. And the actual press conferences should be only coaches and captains. Anything else should be an environment where you get access to 3 or 4 different players. They're a little bit more relaxed. They know they can stand next to us. They've not got the lights in their face. I think that's a much better system. I think American sports have proved that. If cricketers don't want to open up the locker rooms, that's fine. Find another space to be able to do that in. Do it out on the ground if you have to at the end of the day's play. I think that would allow the players to tell their stories better. I think we'd get more personal reactions out of them. I think cricket writing and cricket broadcasting would be far better. And I think it's better for the sport. But instead, at the moment, it is still very much, Rory Dullard from PA, first question.
Given the amount of innovation and change and forward thinking and progression that there has been in the game, is it not spectacular how little the press conference has changed? And the other thing is that players have told me, for 30 years, there have been players who have told me just how intimidating they find it and how uncomfortable they find it. They sit behind a desk in front of a bunch of microphones with journalists, firing questions at them. And it becomes more comfortable, I suppose, if you're lucky enough to play for years and years and years and you recognise the faces, and you eventually become comfortable in that environment. But they've been doing it like that since, well, ever. I mean, you're absolutely right. And COVID was the first time that began to change, because for the first time we would have a press conference where the player was far closer to his comfort zone. He was still surrounded by journalists, but he was on the outfield. He was that's his office. And do you remember we had lots of open air press conferences, and in fact players became a lot more comfortable with Zoom press conferences. But that was not thanks to any forward-thinking cricket administrator. That was thanks to a pandemic that we finally had different formulas. But open zone, I'm familiar with in covering multi-sport events like Commonwealth Games and Olympics. That was the first time I experienced it. There'd be a mixed zone, as you said, and they seemed to work really, really well. And just by the by, and this is just a distraction really, it also discourages lazy journalists, doesn't it? Because you actually have to do some work as a journalist. You need to go find the person you need to speak to, and make an effort.
I was told that one of the reasons that the ECB didn't go towards it is because some senior journalists weren't as happy, because it would have meant slightly more work for them. So the ICC.
Well, there's a surprise, Jarrod.
Yeah. So the ICC went to them. When was it? When was it? They did it before COVID, 2019 World Cup. We had it. We had the mixed zones, and it was brilliant. The ability to go and talk to. I remember there was an innings where Nicholas Pooran had made some runs, and you could talk to Jason Holder, Roddy Eswick, Nicholas Pooran, and someone else about his development, right? You can't do that in a normal press conference. And you get, and also, the players in a normal press conference are trying to get through it. Whereas in this case, if you've only got 2 questions for them, they can go. And then on the days where there's 7 or 8 questions, they'll stay a little bit later. The whole thing works better. If anyone else has any other questions, any speaker requests, put them through while Manners is still here. Ross English says, here we go. We're back on baseball. How much of this extraordinary English Test summer has been down to the ball? Do you expect to see a return to normal batting patterns when the Dukes gets back to producing balls that can stay hard for a decent amount of time? I think that is. I mean, there is absolutely no doubt. I think it was Henry Moran with us on SEN who first pointed out to me. If you go through this entire summer, you got Mitchell and Blundell, you've got Bairstow, Root, Stokes, Overton, and then you could throw in Siva and Marizan Cap. Literally, almost all the most runs this summer have been scored in England by someone in the middle order. That would suggest, and we know that in first-class cricket a similar pattern has happened. That would suggest to me, Manners, that at the very least, what was the best way? I think the way I described it in one of my columns was Bazball has been slightly wind-assisted at the moment.
Jarrod, I just had a few communication issues there. You were breaking up. So can I ask you just to précis the question, the beginning? I didn't actually hear the question.
So the question basically is how much of this is just down, how much of Bazball is just down to the balls? And what I'm saying is if you look at all the middle order players who've made runs through the women's cricket and everything else, clearly the balls have got a pattern to them at the moment, and that Bazball is at the very least wind assisted. Have we lost Manners?
Sorry, we've got the old dodgy connection. I don't know why it's come so late. But down to the balls, you say? The Duke's balls?
Yeah, that's basically the question.
Yes. I think a lot. A lot. I mean, we've had some... I've never seen so many ball changes in my life in a test match. The various stats and various of the 4 test matches we've had now, and the ball has been changed 7 or 8 times. I think the record was 9 times before we got to the 90 over or the 80 over mark. So a lot. I mean, we said that right at the beginning of the show, didn't we? I think that there are a number of reasons that Bazball has got off to this dynamic and successful start. Pitches and balls, for sure. That's not to detract in any way from the skill and the brilliance of Johnny Bairstow and Joe Root and everybody else who's cashed in. And let's not forget, Zach Crawley and Alex Lees made England's fastest ever opening partnership, century opening partnership. So a lot. My gut feel. I'm only hesitating because my gut feel has been wrong for the last 4 Test matches. But my gut feel is that McCullum was absolutely right when he said that this team would fall on its face from time to time, adopting this uber positive approach. But like I said, I'll make a confession. I haven't bought a ticket to watch cricket for 25 years. I've been fortunate enough to be able to work and cover, commentate or write on the matches that I've wanted to see. But given the way England have played in the last 4 years, Jarrod, if you and I weren't going to be at Lord's on August the 17th for the first day of the Test match, actually no, Lord's, I couldn't afford a ticket at Lord's, but I would certainly consider buying a ticket for. I would actually. So is that not sort of an ultimate vote of confidence? If that's what Stokes and McCullum wanted, if they wanted to put, there's no problem putting bums on seats in Test matches in England anyway. But if they wanted to make the game more appealing and more attractive, then after 4 Test matches, you'd have to give them 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I think there's still every chance that this will fail and that it won't work and that they'll have to go back to something else, and that a lot of what's happened at the moment is related to the teams they've played at the times they've played them and the pitches and the balls and all those sorts of things and the good vibes. I mean, they haven't failed yet, so the good vibes are still there. But I think that it is one of the most exciting things to happen to Test cricket in quite some time. And I'm struggling to think of anything else. And if you think about it, that's sort of what England did in one-day cricket. So I wrote a tweet 2016, 2017, calling England the most interesting team in the world. And people absolutely hated that tweet, man, as they tend to do with tweets. And it was because we have been so used to England not being interesting as an international team for so long, and their accomplishments being overblown. You can make a very big argument that from World War II, from 1965 maybe through to the 2015 World Cup, England really had no major impact on world cricket other than the fact they were still England, right? And you can't make that claim anymore. They completely changed the way they play T20 and one-day cricket, and they'll probably change the way that everyone plays one-day cricket on the back of what they did. And now they're trying a method in Test cricket, which is, it's a little bit like setting yourself on fire and running through a forest, but I don't know, maybe they get to the other side and there's a lovely lake. I mean, it's worked so far and it's been spectacular, but there's absolutely no doubt that it's entertaining. I mean, what did McCullum say? They wanted to bring sexy back to cricket, and Bairstow and, Stokes and Root said they wanted to be rock stars. You can't argue they're not doing that. They've absolutely nailed that part of it, whether they'll continue to win or not, and whether other people will follow what they've done. There's a lot of talk about how, West Indies did this and Australia did this and other people followed. No one really followed what the West Indies did because no one else could make it work, right? You need the right kind of players to be able to make it work. With Australia, other teams slightly upped their rate and they kept up in their rate. I'm not sure anyone was as attacking as Australia in one era until this. So it's all quite interesting. We just got a couple of... if you do have any last questions, Manners has to get his hair cut, he's told me, so he has to go very soon. So put your hand up and we'll get to those. But William says, a wet Tuesday in Stoke. Oh, I was so close. I knew it was somewhere not in London, that wet Tuesday. Siddharth says, is Jadeja reaching Imran Khan levels? I don't think so at the moment, but I mean, the problem with Jadeja is every time I watch him on a first day pitch or on a pitch that doesn't suit him, he just looks so benign. But then you go back to his numbers and you're reminded how absolutely spectacular he's been. But I'm really loving his batting. Tom says I still have a Victorian accent. I don't know what a Victorian accent actually means, but probably means I mispronounce Australia occasionally and use the Australia as in Australia with a Y, not Australia with an L. And James says, I remember Finch straight up accepted that the toss played a big part in them winning the T20 World Cup. Yeah, I think that I thought that was so honest, and it did play a big part. We've just got Keshav coming through. Keshav, what's your question?
Hi Jared, hi Neil. Big fan of both of you.
Cheers, man. What's your question?
And so it's Dhoni's birthday today, and it felt like Team India was sort of, giving a throwback to Dhoni's era in that Test match when we used to get so frustrated on overseas tour with the bowling attack he had. So the question is kind of related to that. So, how we failed to defend 370 odd, and before that in South Africa, we failed to defend twice around 240, 250. So is that enough sample size for India to be pressing the panic button and look for options other than Shardul and Siraj? Because Bumrah is, the only one who seems to be threatening, and Shami, we know when he turns it on, but then again, he's also not as consistent. So should we be looking at other options, or, did we discard Ishant Sharma a little too soon?
That's really interesting. Manners, you were at all three of their last tests, I assume, for India. Is that right? All those chases?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah,
so my memory is that one of those chases was not easy for South Africa, but they were in control. And then obviously there was the sort of the more Dean Elgar inspired one, and the other one. But Shardul, after a brilliant start to his career, doesn't look like a consistent test bowler. Actually, his bowling, I don't think he's the most skillful bowler in the world, but I think he's got a very smart brain, but he hasn't been able to consistently put the ball in the right area, which seems to be a big problem when they're doing chases. It did feel a little bit like Jadeja was bowling over the wicket. Siraj wasn't bowling as consistently as he should. It felt a little bit when they were going up against England in that last innings that they had a two-man bowling attack. Is that something that you felt in South Africa?
You're breaking up again a little bit, Jarrod, but I just on the subject of Shardul Thakur, I was very disappointed with him at Edgbaston. Having seen him be really, really effective with swing and wobble seam, as well as movement. He took 7 wickets in the Test match at the Wanderers, and he was good for them. It was a really, really skillful seven-fer. And you may recall at the beginning of England's run chase at Edgbaston, I said, look out for Shardul Thakur. In fact, I was talking him up in the first innings because I haven't seen him, for 6 months. But, he certainly wasn't the bowler. I kept saying he's easy to underestimate, which is a polite way of saying he's not very quick, and he doesn't do a great deal with the ball, but he did just enough on that tour of South Africa. But I really loathe to say this on the evidence of one Test match, but he didn't look like a Test cricketer at Edgbaston, did he?
No, he didn't. I was disappointed with the way he batted and the way he bowled. He shouldn't be the problem here, though, because he should be the 5th bowler in this lineup. So realistically, Siraj and Jadeja are probably... I still don't understand why Jadeja didn't come around the wicket to Johnny Bairstow. He's got such a good record against him in one-day cricket. And Siraj, I felt... I know he took wickets in the first innings, but I just felt that he wasn't able to maintain pressure. And that was a big problem when they got to the 4th innings. That inability to maintain pressure. Whether those other 2 chases were a lot smaller, but this one, England made it feel so small, and there was at no stage where I felt India kept any massive amount of pressure on, unless Jadeja was bowling into the footmarks and, a Bumrah and Shami were bowling. I think that's putting a lot of pressure on 2 or 3 bowlers. And when you come in, it's a bit like watching New Zealand. New Zealand came in with 5 bowlers to all these games, and by the end of the Test match, it was like they had 3 of them, and that's kind of how I felt with India.
Yeah, well, New Zealand picked a spinner and then didn't use him, did they? So that was already a 5-man attack down to 4, and then they had a couple of injuries. But there was a real lack of inspiration, and when they did try something a little bit different, they stuck with it through thick and thin. I mean, the two catching mid wickets to Johnny Bairstow just went on and on and on, and it sure. I mean, we all applaud when captains try and find a bit of inspiration and do something a little bit different, but then they just weren't able to apply the handbrake. When Jadeja came on for the first time, his first 3 overs were pretty tidy, and he was bowling darts at middle and leg, wasn't he? Just to apply the handbrake and to stop England from scoring, and it worked ever so briefly. And maybe again, you question everything, don't you, Jarrod? I mean, now the way the 4 Test matches have gone, but I think there is still a place for attempting anyway to slow the game down, and if you can do that effectively with batters who are trying to play this new high intensity, high velocity game, then it could be even more effective. And India just weren't able to do that, and I don't know whether it's the lack of Test match overs in their legs and whether they got tired. I think they probably were pretty tired by the fourth afternoon. But I know it's very unsexy and it's very unexciting to say that the ability to bowl maidens still has a place in Test cricket, but I think that's true. Even if it's just for an hour or a session, that's obviously not going to be the England way, because I think Bazball applies to going all out with the ball as well, doesn't it? Like Ben Stokes bringing Jack Leach into the attack keeping him in the attack when he's being smashed. But my sense is, and my knowledge of history is not as voluminous as yours, but it's 145 years of Test cricket. There's always been a place to go with the natural rhythms and ups and downs and flows and ebbs and flows of Test match. You can't play it at 90 miles an hour the whole time, I don't think, but that's because I've been conditioned by the last 30 years. I think there will come a time where that the value of bowling dot balls and maidens will always have a place in the game.
Neil Manthorpe, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Thank you to everyone for listening. And I notice when Manners is here, just like there's no questions. You just want to hear him talk. And when it's me, you're interrupting me. Everyone is interrupting to ask as many questions as possible. So that's fair enough when we have the great man involved. But thank you to everyone who turned up on the Spotify Live. Obviously, if you've come in halfway through and you haven't listened to all this, it will be released as a podcast, as it always is. And you'll also be able to see our face and when we both accidentally picked our noses on YouTube. Thank you again. We'll talk to you soon.